Welcome, friends. I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're drifting towards sleep, unwinding after a long day, or simply looking for a quiet companion, you found the right place. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from. Perhaps you're wrapped in a blanket, sitting by a softly lit window, or resting somewhere under an open sky. Wherever you are, I hope you're warm, comfortable, and ready to wander with me into the hidden world that exists beneath our feet, the forgotten realm of the people who lived underground. If you find peace or curiosity in these gentle stories, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it with someone who might need a moment of stillness too. And to those who've already joined along, thank you. Deep beneath the surface of our everyday world, carved into bedrock and volcanic ash, hollowed from salt and limestone, lies a shadow civilization that most will never see. For thousands of years, humans have descended into darkness, not as prisoners or outcasts, but as pioneers of an alternative way of being. They have built cities that never see sunlight, churches that echo with whispered prayers in eternal twilight, and homes where families have lived for generations without ever feeling the wind. These underground dwellers are not mythical creatures or fantasy beings. They are our ancestors, our contemporaries, and perhaps our future. They are the Christians fleeing persecution in ancient Turkey, the miners seeking opal in the Australian desert, the families preparing for nuclear war in suburban basements. They are the Vietnamese villagers who turned the earth itself into a weapon, the Parisians who built their city on a foundation of human bones, the Londoners who found sanctuary in subway tunnels during the darkest nights of war. What drives humans to burrow? What ancient instinct calls us downward when the world above becomes too dangerous, too hot, too cold, too crowded? Perhaps it is the same impulse that once led our earliest ancestors to seek shelter in caves. The recognition that safety often lies not in conquering the landscape, but in disappearing into it. The earth offers what the surface world cannot: constancy, protection, and a kind of geological embrace that has remained unchanged since the continents first took their current shape. In these subterranean realms, time moves differently. The urgent rhythms that govern life above the rising and setting of the sun, the changing of seasons, the pressure of weather systems moving across vast distances, all become irrelevant. Down here, human time takes precedence. Meals are eaten when hunger calls. Sleep comes when exhaustion demands it. And the day's work follows patterns established not by celestial mechanics, but by the practical needs of community survival. The earth keeps its own time here, measured not in hours or days, but in the slow settling of stone, the gradual seepage of groundwater through limestone, the patient accumulation of mineral deposits that build up grain by grain over centuries. A drop of water that begins its journey on the surface might take decades to reach the deepest chambers, carrying with it traces of rain that fell when the world above was entirely different. Temperature in these depths becomes a constant companion, neither the biting cold of winter nor the oppressive heat of summer, but something more subtle, a coolness that seeps through clothing and skin, eventually becoming part of the body's internal landscape. It is neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, but simply present, like gravity or air pressure. One of those fundamental conditions that shape existence without demanding conscious attention. Sound behaves strangely in these carved spaces. Footsteps that would barely register on a busy street above become sharp reports that echo down corridors carved centuries ago. Whispered conversations carry through narrow passages worn smooth by countless hands, traveling distances that would surprise those who forget how efficiently stone can conduct vibration. Children learn to move quietly, not from any imposed discipline, but from the natural acoustics of their environment, where every sound becomes communal property. Yet when silence comes, it is absolute in a way that surface dwellers rarely experience. It is not the relative quiet of a still night, punctuated by distant traffic or the rustle of wind through leaves. It is the silence of stone itself, of compressed earth that has not moved for millennia, of spaces where no bird has ever sung and no insect has ever buzzed. In this silence, the sound of one's own heartbeat becomes audible, the quiet rush of blood through vessels, the tiny mechanical sounds of breathing and swallowing that usually disappear beneath the constant background noise of the living world. The air in these places carries its own character. It is often cooler than surface air, sometimes tinged with the mineral taste of limestone or the metallic notes of iron-rich soil. In some chambers, it moves in slow currents created by temperature differences or the subtle pressure changes that occur when surface weather systems pass overhead. In others, it remains perfectly still, creating pockets of atmosphere that might have been trapped there for years, decades, even centuries. Light, when it exists at all, comes from human sources: torches, oil lamps, electric bulbs strung along passages like mechanical constellations. These artificial suns create pools of illumination surrounded by darkness so complete that it seems almost solid, as if one could reach out and touch it. The interplay between light and shadow becomes architectural, defining spaces not through walls and ceilings but through the boundaries between the visible and the invisible. Yet mystery persists in these depths, perhaps more than anywhere else on Earth. Archaeologists continue to discover new chambers in cities thought fully explored for decades. Ground-penetrating radar reveals hollow spaces that no living person remembers creating. Tunnels lead to dead ends for reasons lost to time, their original purposes becoming subjects of scholarly debate and local legend. Some passages flood with underground springs that appear and disappear according to patterns no one can predict, following hydrological cycles that operate on timescales far longer than human memory. The people who choose to live in these spaces, whether temporarily or permanently, develop a different relationship with the physical world. Without windows to frame views of distant mountains or changing skies, attention turns inward, both literally and figuratively. Rooms become entire worlds. Corridors become highways between distinct universes. A single chamber might serve as kitchen, bedroom, workshop, and sanctuary, transforming its identity through the simple rearrangement of furniture or the lighting of different lamps. How curious that humans, who evolved under open skies and learned to navigate by reading the stars, should find such comfort in spaces where no star can be seen. How strange that creatures who developed color vision to distinguish ripe fruit from green leaves should create homes where color becomes largely irrelevant. How quietly revolutionary, this choice to live not above the earth, but within it, as if we were seeds waiting patiently for some distant spring that may never come. Perhaps this is what calls people underground, not fear of the world above, but recognition that the earth itself offers something that the surface cannot, a different kind of peace, a silence that is not empty but full, a darkness that is not the absence of light but the presence of something else entirely, the slow, patient breathing of stone, the gentle weight of centuries, the promise that some shelters are so deep, so permanent, that nothing on the surface can disturb them. In the heart of ancient Anatolia, where the earth bears the scars of volcanic fury that erupted millions of years ago, the landscape tells a story written in ash and time. The volcanoes of Cappadocia hurled their contents across the region with such force that layers of tough compressed volcanic debris accumulated to depths that would eventually measure hundreds of feet. This soft, chalky stone possesses a curious property. It can be carved with simple tools, yet hardens when exposed to air, creating walls that will endure for millennia. The first people to recognize this geological gift arrived sometime in the 4th century. Though some evidence suggests earlier inhabitants may have begun the work centuries before, these were not primitive cave dwellers driven by desperation, but sophisticated communities who understood that the earth itself could be transformed into architecture. They came with iron tools and careful plans, with knowledge of ventilation and drainage, with the patience required to hollow out entire cities grain by grain. The process begins with a single room. A family or small group selects a spot where the tuff layer runs deep and stable, away from surface water that might cause flooding, yet close enough to underground springs to provide fresh water. They mark out dimensions on the ground, then begin the slow work of excavation. Unlike mining, which seeks to extract valuable materials, this digging has a different purpose: to create negative space, to sculpt absence itself into usefulness. Each shovelful of removed stone becomes building material for surface structures. Nothing goes to waste in this economy of excavation. The soft tuff, once carved away, can be shaped into blocks for walls, ground into mortar for binding, or left to dry into a material harder than the original stone. The underground city grows by subtraction while the surface settlements expand through addition, both processes feeding each other in an endless cycle of earth transformation. The Christians who fled here during periods of persecution brought with them not only their faith, but their understanding of community organization. They carved not random caves, but planned neighborhoods, complete with communal kitchens, meeting halls, and workshops. Each family receives private chambers, but the overall design emphasizes shared space and collective security. Doorways between rooms can be sealed with rolling stone doors, massive circular slabs that require multiple people to move, creating barriers that could protect entire sections of the underground city from unwanted intrusions. Ventilation becomes both practical necessity and engineering marvel. The architects of these spaces understand that air, like water, must flow to remain healthy. They carve vertical shafts that extend from the deepest chambers to the surface, creating chimneys that draw fresh air downward through a system of interconnected passages. Some of these air shafts descend more than 200 feet, maintaining steady circulation even in the furthest reaches of the underground complex. The darkness in these carved spaces is not uniform. Different chambers receive different qualities of illumination depending on their proximity to air shafts and their intended use. Storage rooms remain in perpetual twilight, preserving food and wine in conditions that change little from season to season. Living spaces receive modest amounts of filtered light during daytime hours, enough to distinguish faces and perform detailed work. Common areas, where larger groups gather for meals or religious observances, often feature multiple light sources: oil lamps positioned in carved niches, torches mounted in iron brackets, sometimes even mirrors positioned to redirect light from brighter chambers. Water management in these underground cities demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of hydraulics that would not be surpassed for centuries. Natural springs are diverted through carved channels that follow the gentle slopes of excavated corridors, providing fresh water to every section of the community. Wastewater flows through separate channels toward collection points where it can be processed or directed to underground reservoirs. Some of these water systems continue to function today, more than 1,500 years after their construction. Their engineering so sound that modern plumbers study them to understand principles of gravity-fed distribution. The sounds that fill these spaces create an acoustic environment unlike anything on the surface world. Footsteps echo differently depending on the height of the ceiling and the width of the corridor. Conversations in one chamber can be heard in adjacent rooms, creating a natural communication network that allows information to travel quickly through the entire community. Children playing in distant passages produce sounds that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere, their laughter becoming part of the ambient atmosphere that defines daily life in the depths. Yet mysteries persist in these ancient excavations. Archaeologists continue to discover chambers whose purposes remain unclear, rooms too small for habitation, too large for storage, positioned in locations that serve no obvious practical function. Some passages end abruptly at solid walls, as if the original diggers encountered something that forced them to abandon their work. Other tunnels extend far beyond the main city complex, disappearing into darkness that modern explorers have not yet fully mapped. The temperature in these volcanic chambers remains constant year-round, hovering around 55 degrees Fahrenheit regardless of surface conditions. This natural climate control made underground living not just tolerable, but in many ways preferable to the extreme temperature variations that characterize the Cappadocian surface world, where summer heat can exceed 100 degrees and winter cold can drop well below freezing. Families could live comfortably in their carved homes, while surface dwellers struggled with seasonal extremes that made agriculture challenging and travel dangerous. How remarkable that these early architects understood principles that modern builders are only beginning to rediscover: that the Earth itself provides the most reliable insulation, that gravity can power water systems more efficiently than most mechanical pumps, that communities designed around shared resources and collective security can thrive in conditions that would challenge individual households. How patient they must have been, these first diggers, knowing that the work they began would require generations to complete, that the cities they carved would shelter children not yet born and serve purposes not yet imagined. The city of Derinkuyu reveals itself reluctantly, one level at a time, like geological strata exposed by patient erosion. What appears from the surface as a modest opening in the Cappadocian landscape, barely wide enough for two people to pass, descends through 18 distinct floors, each carved with the precision of master stoneworkers who understood that their subterranean metropolis would need to function as a complete world unto itself. At its peak capacity, this underground labyrinth sheltered 20,000 souls in a darkness so complete that torchlight became their only sun. The descent begins through a narrow stairway carved directly into the tuff, each step worn smooth by countless feet over more than 1,000 years of continuous use. The walls here bear the marks of the original excavation tools, iron chisels and wooden hammers that bit into the volcanic stone grain by grain, creating passages just wide enough for a person carrying supplies to navigate comfortably. The ceiling height varies deliberately. Some corridors require visitors to duck, creating natural checkpoints where movement can be controlled and monitored. On the first level below ground, the spaces open into chambers that served as stables for livestock and storage areas for grain and wine. The architects understood that any community planning to shelter underground for extended periods would need to bring their animals with them, not just for food, but for the psychological comfort that comes from maintaining familiar rhythms of agricultural life even in artificial surroundings. Stone mangers line the walls, carved with drainage channels that directed animal waste towards collection points where it could be processed into fertilizer for underground gardens. Descending further, the second and third levels reveal residential quarters where families established their underground homes during times when the surface world became too dangerous for habitation. Each family unit consists of several interconnected chambers, a main living space large enough for meals and daily activities, smaller alcoves for sleeping, and storage areas for personal belongings and food supplies. Privacy comes not from walls but from arrangement chambers positioned around corners from main thoroughfares, or elevated slightly above corridor level to create acoustic separation. The fourth level introduces visitors to the remarkable engineering that makes life possible at such depths. Here, the ventilation system reaches its most sophisticated expression, with air shafts carved in precise angles to maximize circulation throughout the entire complex. These shafts, some extending more than 200 feet from surface to deepest level, create a natural air conditioning system that maintains breathable atmosphere even when every chamber is occupied. The movement of air through these passages produces a subtle sound, not quite wind, not quite whisper, that becomes the background music of underground life. Water management on the deeper levels demonstrates hydraulic engineering that would challenge modern designers. Natural springs, tapped through carefully positioned wells, provide fresh water that flows through carved channels following gravity-fed routes to every section of the city. The water moves in a continuous circuit from springs to storage tanks to distribution channels to waste collection points to filtration areas where it can be cleaned and recycled. Some of these water channels remain active today, their flow rates varying with seasonal changes in the underground water table that follows patterns established long before humans arrived in this landscape. The 5th and 6th levels house communal facilities that reveal the sophisticated social organization required for underground urban life. Large halls served as meeting places where community decisions could be made collectively. Their acoustics designed to carry speakers' voices clearly to every listener without creating the echoing confusion that plagued earlier, less carefully planned chambers. Kitchen areas feature multiple hearths with flue systems that channel smoke upward through dedicated ventilation shafts, allowing cooking fires to burn without filling living spaces with dangerous fumes. Religious spaces occupy the 7th level, where carved churches demonstrate the spiritual life that flourished in these depths. The chambers here receive special attention to acoustic properties, with dome-shaped ceilings that amplify voices during prayer and song. Wall niches hold oil lamps positioned to create pools of warm light during religious observances, while carved crosses and other decorative elements provide focal points for contemplation. The stonework in these religious chambers often shows finer detail than utilitarian spaces, suggesting that communities invested extra effort in creating beautiful surroundings for their most sacred activities. The 8th and deepest level, accessible to modern visitors, represents the ultimate expression of underground architecture. Here, in chambers that may never have seen natural light, the builders created spaces for the most essential community functions, grain storage in rooms designed to maintain consistent temperature and humidity, wine cellars where fermentation could proceed undisturbed by surface weather variations, and workshops where craftspeople could continue their trades even during extended periods of surface isolation. The darkness at these depths possesses qualities that surface dwellers rarely experience. It is not merely the absence of light, but something more substantial, a presence that seems to absorb sound, temperature, even time itself. Modern visitors, dependent on electric lights and battery-powered torches, can barely imagine what this darkness meant to people who lived with it daily, who learned to navigate by touch and sound, who developed an intimacy with shadow that allowed them to function in conditions that would challenge most contemporary humans. Temperature at the lowest levels remains constant regardless of surface conditions, neither warm nor cold, but something neutral that becomes part of the body's baseline experience. This geological climate control made it possible for communities to survive surface catastrophes that might last for months or even years, maintaining underground life while waiting for conditions above to improve. Yet mysteries persist, even in this most thoroughly explored of underground cities. Ground-penetrating radar suggests the existence of additional chambers that have not yet been opened, passages that may extend even deeper than the currently known levels. Some tunnels appear to connect Derinkuyu with other underground cities in the region, creating a network of subterranean communities that could communicate and share resources across distances measured in miles rather than feet. How extraordinary that human beings, creatures who evolved under open skies, should prove so capable of creating thriving communities in spaces where no natural light can penetrate. How patient these original builders must have been. knowing that the work of carving 18 levels would require generations to complete. How quietly profound. This demonstration that safety sometimes lies not in building walls to keep the world out, but in disappearing so completely into the earth that the surface world simply forgets you exist. Beneath the elegant boulevards and ancient monuments of Paris, a second city spreads through tunnels that follow the ghost map of a medieval quarrying operation that began in the 12th century. What started as practical excavation, the removal of limestone blocks, to build the Cathedral of Notre Dame and countless other structures that define the City of Light, eventually created a subterranean void so vast that it threatened the stability of the neighborhoods above. By the 18th century, entire streets began collapsing into the hollowed earth beneath them, swallowing houses and their inhabitants into darkness that seemed to hunger for the weight of civilization. The limestone that underlies Paris formed millions of years ago when shallow seas covered this region, depositing layer upon layer of compressed marine organisms that eventually hardened into building stone of exceptional quality. Medieval quarrymen recognized this geological treasure and began extracting it through surface pits that gradually deepened into underground galleries. They followed the most accessible veins of stone, creating a network of passages that would eventually extend for nearly 200 miles beneath the growing city. The extraction process followed patterns established by generations of stoneworkers who understood their craft through touch and experience rather than written manuals. Teams of miners would identify promising limestone deposits by examining surface outcroppings and studying the color variations that indicated stone quality. They dug shafts straight down to the desired level, then began carving horizontal galleries that followed the limestone seams. The stone they removed traveled upward through pulley systems operated by workers who never descended into the quarries themselves, creating a division of labor between surface and underground crews. Each gallery required careful planning to prevent collapse while maximizing stone extraction. The quarrymen left pillars of uncut limestone at regular intervals, creating underground architecture that resembled a forest of stone columns supporting the earth above. These support pillars followed engineering principles that the workers understood: intuitively wider bases, narrower tops, spacing calculated to distribute weight evenly across the excavated areas. Modern structural engineers studying these medieval excavations often express amazement at their sophistication, noting that computer modeling validates design decisions made centuries before anyone understood the mathematical principles involved. The abandoned quarries attracted various forms of underground activity as Paris grew into a major European city. Smugglers used the tunnels to move goods without paying customs duties, creating storage areas in chambers that had once held limestone blocks. Revolutionaries held secret meetings in galleries where their voices would not carry to government informants on the surface. Criminals established hideouts in passages so complex that pursuing authorities could become lost for days in the labyrinthine darkness. By the late 18th century, the problem of what to do with Paris's overflowing cemeteries intersected dramatically with the challenge of stabilizing the undermined city. Church graveyards had reached capacity, creating health hazards that threatened public safety, while the empty quarries represented unused space that could solve multiple urban problems simultaneously. The decision to relocate millions of human remains from surface cemeteries to underground chambers created one of the world's most extraordinary necropoli, a city of the dead that occupies former limestone mines. The transfer of remains began in 1787 and continued for years, with night processions of black-draped carts carrying bones from overflowing cemeteries to quarry entrances where they could be lowered into the depths. Workers arranged the relocated skeletal remains with artistic care, creating walls of femurs punctuated by patterns of skulls, designing decorative elements from human bones that had once walked the streets above. The arrangement process required both practical and aesthetic considerations, ensuring adequate ventilation around the bone displays while creating visual compositions that would inspire contemplation rather than horror. The temperature in these bone-lined chambers remains constant year-round, hovering around 57 degrees Fahrenheit, cool enough to preserve organic materials, but not so cold as to cause discomfort for visitors. This natural climate control, combined with the excellent ventilation provided by the quarry system, creates preservation conditions that have kept the bone arrangements intact for more than 2 centuries. Some skulls still retain teeth so perfect they could have been cleaned yesterday, while femurs show muscle attachment points as clearly defined as those in anatomical textbooks. The acoustic properties of the bone chambers create an unusual sound environment where whispers carry clearly across considerable distances, while louder sounds seem muffled by the calcium carbonate that surrounds them. Footsteps on the stone floors echo differently depending on whether the walker is surrounded by walls of limestone blocks or arrangements of human remains, creating a subtle audio map that experienced guides use to navigate even in limited lighting conditions. Modern visitors often remark on the silence that pervades these spaces, not the empty quiet of unused buildings, but something more substantial, as if the presence of so many human remains creates a different quality of stillness. Conversations tend to become subdued naturally, not from any imposed reverence, but from the acoustic dampening effect of thousands of skulls and the psychological impact of being surrounded by tangible evidence of mortality on such an overwhelming scale. Yet mysteries persist in these depths beneath Paris. Many sections of the quarry system remain unexplored, sealed off either by deliberate closure or by natural collapses that have occurred over the centuries. Ground-penetrating radar suggests the existence of chambers and passages that are not marked on any official map, spaces that may contain everything from forgotten artifacts to evidence of historical events that took place in the underground darkness. Some passages appear to extend beyond the currently known network, possibly connecting with natural caves or other excavations that predate the limestone quarries. The bone arrangements themselves raise questions that have never been fully answered. While official records document the transfer of remains from specific cemeteries, the total number of individuals represented in the displays can only be estimated. Some areas contain bones arranged in patterns that suggest symbolic meaning, but the intentions of the original arrangers have been lost to time, leaving modern observers to speculate about messages that may have been encoded in configurations of human remains. How sobering to walk through galleries where the building stones of medieval Paris once waited to become cathedrals and palaces, now serving as the final resting place for millions of Parisians who lived and died above this stone foundation. How quietly profound this transformation of commercial excavation into sacred space, this conversion of economic activity into contemplation of mortality. How fitting that a city famous for its beauty should also create, in its depths, one of the world's most striking meditations on the relationship between life and death, between the structures we build and the bones we leave behind. Deep beneath the Polish countryside, in the ancient salt mines of Wieliczka, miners have carved sanctuaries from crystalline deposits that formed when prehistoric seas evaporated millions of years ago. Here, in chambers hollowed from walls of pure sodium chloride, underground chapels emerge from living rock that weeps mineral tears, creating places of worship where every surface gleams with the accumulated salt of geological ages. The miners who created these sacred spaces worked with materials that responded to their tools like soft wood, yet hardened into permanence once exposed to the subtle moisture that permeates even the driest underground environments. Salt mining in this region began in the 13th century, when surface deposits led explorers to discover vast underground formations of rock salt laid down when the Carpathian Basin was covered by ancient seas. The extraction process required techniques different from those used in coal or metal mining, since salt possesses unique properties that make it both easier and more dangerous to excavate. Salt can be carved with simple tools when fresh, but exposure to air causes it to harden rapidly, creating surfaces that can support tremendous weight while remaining smooth to the touch. The miners descended through vertical shafts that required constant maintenance to prevent collapse, since salt's tendency to absorb moisture from air can cause structural instability if not properly managed. Once underground, they worked in chambers lit by oil lamps, whose flames created dancing shadows on walls that reflected light with an intensity unknown in other types of mining operations. The salt crystals acted as natural mirrors, amplifying illumination and creating visual effects that transformed utilitarian workspaces into environments of unexpected beauty. The decision to carve religious spaces within the salt mines reflected both practical and spiritual considerations. Miners needed places where they could pray for safety in an occupation that claimed lives regularly through cave-ins, flooding, and exposure to dangerous gases that could accumulate in poorly ventilated areas. But beyond these practical concerns, the miners discovered that salt provided an ideal medium for religious art, allowing them to create sculptural decorations that would be impossible in harder stone or softer earth. The Chapel of St. Kinga, the most famous of these underground sanctuaries, occupies a chamber more than 100 feet long, carved entirely from salt deposits that show the geological history of the region in layers of different colors and textures. The ceiling rises to heights that dwarf most surface churches, supported by salt pillars that have been shaped and decorated with religious imagery carved directly into the crystalline walls. Every surface in the chapel floors, walls, ceiling, altar, even the chandeliers consists of salt that has been carved, polished, and arranged by miners whose artistic skills rivaled those of professional sculptors. The acoustic properties of these salt chambers create extraordinary conditions for religious music and spoken prayer. Sound reflects off the crystalline walls with unusual clarity, creating natural amplification that allows whispered prayers to be heard throughout the space while preventing the echoing confusion that plagues many large enclosed areas. Choral music performed in these chambers possesses qualities that singers describe as ethereal, with harmonies seeming to emerge from the salt walls themselves as different frequencies resonate at various pitches. The temperature in the salt chambers remains remarkably stable, typically maintaining temperatures in the mid-50s Fahrenheit regardless of surface weather conditions. This natural climate control, combined with the preservative properties of salt itself, has allowed the carved religious decorations to survive for centuries without significant deterioration. Some sculptures show details as sharp as the day they were completed, with facial expressions on carved saints and angels remaining clearly visible after hundreds of years in the underground environment. Humidity in these spaces follows patterns that initially puzzle visitors from the surface world. While salt typically absorbs moisture from air, creating dry conditions that preserve organic materials, the underground chambers sometimes develop a subtle dampness that causes the walls to weep, producing tiny droplets of concentrated brine that slide slowly down carved surfaces like mineral tears. This weeping occurs most noticeably during changes in barometric pressure, as if the Earth itself responds to weather systems passing overhead. The lighting in these underground chapels has evolved dramatically over the centuries of their use. Originally illuminated by oil lamps and candles that created warm, flickering light that made the salt walls seem to pulse with life. Many chambers now feature electric lighting systems designed to minimize heat production while maximizing the visual impact of the carved decorations. Modern lighting reveals details in the salt sculptures that would have been invisible to their original creators, showing tool marks and artistic techniques that demonstrate remarkable sophistication. Yet mysteries persist in these salt mine sanctuaries that continue to puzzle both religious scholars and mining engineers. Some chambers contain carvings that appear to predate the official records of their creation, suggesting that miners may have been creating religious art in these spaces long before church authorities sanctioned the practice. Other rooms show evidence of artistic techniques that seem too advanced for the tools that would have been available to medieval miners, raising questions about who actually created some of the more sophisticated sculptural elements. The preservation of organic materials in the salt environment has revealed unexpected artifacts, wooden tools that retain their original strength after centuries underground, leather items that remain flexible despite their age, even paper documents that can still be read clearly. These discoveries suggest that the salt mines may have served as informal archives where miners stored personal and religious items, creating accidental time capsules that provide insights into underground life during periods when surface records were lost or destroyed. Ventilation in the deeper chambers follows patterns that mining engineers still study to understand how medieval workers managed to maintain breathable air at such depths. The natural air circulation systems they created continue to function today, drawing fresh air downward through carefully positioned shafts and exhausting stale air through separate channels that prevent the accumulation of dangerous gases. Some of these ventilation systems operate so efficiently that they create subtle air currents that make votive candles flicker in patterns that seem to respond to prayers and movements of people in the chambers. How remarkable that miners, whose daily work involved the extraction of one of humanity's most essential commodities, should choose to express their deepest spiritual aspirations in the very material they labored to harvest. How patient they must have been. These underground artists, carving religious scenes grain by grain from walls that wept salt tears as they worked, how quietly revolutionary. This transformation of commercial excavation into sacred art, this demonstration that the most profound expressions of human faith can emerge from the most utilitarian of environments. Beneath the red earth and tangled jungle of Cu Chi district in southern Vietnam, an entire civilization burrows through clay soil that hardens like concrete when properly excavated, creating a network of tunnels that extends for more than 200 miles through earth that has been shaped by monsoon rains and river floods for thousands of years. Here, in passages narrow enough that most adults must crawl on hands and knees, Vietnamese villagers created an underground world complete with hospitals, schools, kitchens, and workshops, a shadow society that operated according to its own rules, while the world above erupted in warfare that would claim millions of lives. The soil of Cu Chi possesses unique properties that made extensive tunnel construction possible without the elaborate support systems required in other underground excavations. The laterite clay, formed by tropical weathering over millions of years, can be carved when moist, but hardens to remarkable strength when dried, creating tunnel walls that remain stable for decades without reinforcement. This natural building material allowed diggers to create passages that would have collapsed immediately in softer soil, while remaining workable enough that excavation could proceed with simple hand tools. The tunnel construction began in the late 1940s as a defensive measure against French colonial forces, but expanded dramatically during the American involvement in Vietnam when strategic necessity demanded that entire communities disappear beneath the earth. Villages that had existed on the surface for generations simply vanished, their populations migrating to underground chambers where they could continue their lives while remaining invisible to aircraft, ground troops, and the sophisticated detection equipment that characterized modern warfare. The excavation process required techniques that reflected both practical necessity and accumulated wisdom about underground survival. Diggers worked primarily at night, removing soil in small quantities that could be dispersed without creating visible evidence of tunnel construction. The removed earth went into rice fields where it could be mixed with agricultural soil, scattered in streams where currents would carry it away, or spread so thinly across existing ground that aerial photography would reveal no traces of excavation activity. Each tunnel system begins with main arteries that follow natural contours of the landscape, typically running parallel to streams or following ridgelines, where drainage would prevent flooding during the monsoon seasons that bring torrential rains to the region. From these primary passages, smaller tunnels branch off toward family chambers, communal areas, and specialized facilities designed for specific aspects of underground community life. The network grows organically, following needs rather than predetermined plans, creating a labyrinth that seems chaotic to outsiders, but follows logical patterns understood by those who live within it. Living chambers carved from the tunnel walls must accommodate entire families in spaces barely large enough for sleeping and basic daily activities. Privacy comes from arrangement rather than walls, sleeping areas positioned around corners from main passages. Family spaces elevated slightly above tunnel floors to provide acoustic separation. Personal belongings reduced to essentials that can be stored in carved niches or suspended from tunnel ceilings on hooks carved directly into the hardened clay walls. The kitchen areas represent remarkable innovations in underground engineering, featuring cooking fires that burn without producing visible smoke on the surface. The secret lies in flue systems that channel combustion gases through long horizontal passages before allowing them to escape through outlets positioned far from the actual cooking sites. These smoke dispersal systems create such effective concealment that meals can be prepared while enemy forces patrol directly overhead, unaware that families are cooking dinner just feet beneath their boots. Ventilation in the tunnel systems follows principles discovered through trial and error by diggers who understood that air, like water, must flow to remain healthy. They create air shafts disguised as termite mounds or concealed within the root systems of large trees, drawing fresh air downward through channels that connect every inhabited area of the tunnel network. The air movement remains subtle enough to avoid detection, but sufficient to support human life even in the deepest chambers. Medical facilities in the tunnels demonstrate the ingenuity required to provide health care in spaces where traditional hospital equipment cannot function. Operating rooms carved from tunnel walls feature drainage systems that channel away surgical waste, lighting systems that concentrate illumination on work areas while maintaining concealment from the surface, and storage areas for medical supplies that must remain sterile in humid underground conditions. Some surgical procedures pioneered in these tunnel hospitals became standard practice in surface medical facilities after the war. The acoustic environment in the tunnel system creates unique challenges and opportunities for underground communities. Conversations in one area can be heard throughout large sections of the network, requiring residents to develop communication protocols that allow necessary coordination while maintaining operational security. Children learn to play quietly, not from imposed discipline, but from understanding that sound travels through clay soil in ways that could reveal tunnel locations to listening devices used by surface forces. Water management in the tunnel systems requires constant attention to prevent flooding that could destroy months of excavation work in a single monsoon downpour. The diggers create drainage channels that follow gravity toward collection points, where water can be directed away from living areas. Storage systems that capture and preserve fresh water during dry seasons, and emergency procedures for evacuating flooded sections when seasonal rains exceed the capacity of drainage systems. Yet mysteries persist in these tunnel networks that continue to puzzle military historians and engineering experts. Some passages extend far beyond what tactical necessity would seem to require, disappearing into jungle areas where no strategic targets existed. Other chambers show evidence of activities that remain unexplained rooms too large for storage, too small for habitation, positioned in locations that serve no obvious military or civilian purpose. The psychological impact of underground life on tunnel residents remains a subject of ongoing study. living in spaces where natural light never penetrates, where the rhythms of day and night become human constructions rather than natural phenomena, where the sounds of warfare above create constant background stress. These conditions challenge human adaptability in ways that few other environments have tested. Yet, communities thrived in these tunnels for years, maintaining social structures, educational systems, and cultural traditions that allowed them to preserve their identity while adapting to subterranean existence. Temperature regulation in the tunnels follows the same principles that make other underground spaces comfortable year-round, with clay soil providing insulation that maintains moderate temperatures regardless of surface conditions. During the dry season, when surface temperatures can exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the tunnels remain cool enough for normal activity. During monsoon periods, when surface flooding makes above-ground movement dangerous, the tunnels provide warm, dry shelter for families who might otherwise face displacement. How extraordinary that entire communities could disappear so completely into the earth that sophisticated military forces could patrol above them without detecting their presence. How patient these tunnel builders must have been, knowing that their excavation work would need to continue for years while warfare raged overhead. How quietly revolutionary. This demonstration that the earth itself could become both sanctuary and weapon. That disappearance could be more powerful than confrontation. When German bombers darkened the London sky in 1940, transforming night into a cacophony of air raid sirens and falling explosives, 8 million civilians discovered that salvation lay not in reinforced buildings or countryside evacuation, but in descending into the underground stations that had been carved from London clay decades earlier for an entirely different purpose. What began as a transportation system designed to move commuters efficiently beneath the congested streets of the world's largest city became, almost overnight, a vast network of subterranean shelters where entire families established nightly residences in tunnels that had never been intended for human habitation. The London Underground, excavated beginning in the 1860s using techniques that represented the cutting edge of Victorian engineering, created tube-shaped tunnels by boring through the blue clay that underlies central London. This clay, deposited millions of years ago when the Thames Valley was part of a much larger river system, possesses ideal properties for tunnel construction, stable enough to maintain structural integrity without extensive reinforcement, yet soft enough to allow excavation with the steam-powered boring machines that represented 19th century technology at its most ambitious. The transformation from transportation system to shelter network happened gradually, then suddenly, as the reality of aerial bombardment made surface life untenable for families who could not afford private shelters or country evacuations. Initially, government authorities discouraged underground shelter use, fearing that people might become so comfortable underground that they would refuse to return to surface jobs essential for war production. But as bombing intensified and casualties mounted, official policy shifted to accommodate the reality that Londoners had already voted with their feet, or rather, with their descent into the depths. The evening migration to the underground stations began each day around 4 o'clock, when families would gather their bedding, food supplies, and personal belongings for the journey underground. By the time air raid sirens sounded, platforms that had been designed to accommodate brief stops by commuter trains were transformed into underground neighborhoods, where 80,000 people would spend the night in tunnels that stretched for miles beneath the burning city above. The acoustic environment in the underground shelters created unique challenges and unexpected comforts for the families who made their temporary homes there. The curved walls of the tube tunnels amplified some sounds while muffling others, creating an underground soundscape where conversations from distant platform areas could be heard clearly while nearby activities might be inaudible. Children's voices carried through the tunnels with particular clarity, creating a constant background of young voices that reminded adult shelter seekers that life continued despite the warfare raging overhead. Sleeping arrangements on the underground platforms required improvisation that would have challenged the most experienced camping enthusiasts. Families marked out territory using blankets and personal belongings, creating private spaces on platforms designed for rapid passenger movement rather than extended occupation. The concrete surfaces provided no natural cushioning, forcing shelter seekers to develop sleeping techniques that allowed rest despite conditions that would normally prevent comfortable sleep. The temperature in the underground tunnels remained relatively stable compared to surface conditions, though the presence of thousands of human bodies created microclimates that varied significantly from platform to platform. Areas near ventilation shafts stayed cooler but could become drafty during winter months, while sections farther from air circulation systems grew warm and stuffy when packed with people seeking shelter from bombing attacks that might continue for hours. Food preparation and consumption in the underground shelters required community cooperation that transformed individual families into temporary neighborhoods with shared resources and mutual responsibilities. Some stations developed informal kitchens where families could prepare simple meals using portable stoves, while others relied on volunteers who brought food from surface establishments that remained open during daylight hours. The sharing of food became not just practical necessity, but social ritual that helped maintain morale during the darkest periods of the bombing campaign. Sanitation in the underground shelters represented one of the most challenging aspects of converting transportation infrastructure for extended human occupation. The toilet facilities designed to serve brief commuter stops proved completely inadequate for thousands of people spending entire nights underground. Emergency sanitation systems developed through community initiative rather than official planning, with shelter dwellers creating informal protocols for waste management that maintained minimal standards of hygiene despite overcrowded conditions. The lighting in the underground shelters created an atmosphere unlike anything most Londoners had previously experienced. The electric illumination designed for transportation use remained active throughout the night, creating a perpetual twilight that disrupted normal sleep patterns while providing enough visibility for essential activities. Some areas of platforms remained in shadow, creating pockets of relative darkness where families could achieve something approaching normal rest, while main thoroughfares stayed brightly lit to allow movement of people and supplies. Entertainment and education in the underground shelters emerged organically as communities developed ways to occupy the long hours between evening descent and morning return to surface life. Music became particularly important, with spontaneous singing that took advantage of the acoustic properties of the tube tunnels to create performances that could be heard throughout entire stations. Books passed from family to family, creating informal libraries that provided escape from the reality of warfare through literature that had survived from peacetime collections. The medical needs of underground shelter populations required improvised healthcare systems that operated without traditional hospital equipment or sterile conditions. Volunteer nurses moved between platforms, providing basic care for conditions ranging from minor injuries sustained in the crowded tunnels to more serious health problems that developed from prolonged exposure to underground conditions. Childbirth in the underground shelters became sufficiently common that experienced midwives developed techniques specifically adapted to tunnel environments. Yet, mysteries persist about the underground shelter experience that oral histories have never fully captured. Some platforms developed social hierarchies and informal governance systems whose details were never officially recorded, leaving historians to speculate about how communities self-organized during the months when underground stations served as temporary cities. Other aspects of shelter life remain undocumented. The psychological impact of spending months sleeping in transportation tunnels, the long-term health effects of extended underground residence, the cultural changes that emerged from this massive social experiment in communal living. The ventilation systems in the underground tunnels Designed to clear train smoke and maintain air quality for brief passenger occupancy, proved barely adequate for the continuous presence of thousands of people throughout entire nights. The air quality varied dramatically from station to station depending on depth, proximity to surface ventilation, and the number of people seeking shelter. Some areas maintained relatively fresh air circulation, while others became stuffy and uncomfortable when packed beyond their intended capacity. How remarkable that transportation infrastructure built for entirely different purposes could accommodate one of the largest temporary relocations of urban population in human history. How resilient these underground shelter communities proved to be, developing social systems and survival strategies that allowed them to maintain family life and community bonds despite conditions that challenged every assumption about normal domestic existence. How quietly heroic. This nightly descent into darkness that represented not retreat, but adaptation. Not surrender, but the determination to preserve ordinary life despite extraordinary circumstances. In the heart of the Australian outback, where summer temperatures soar beyond human endurance and the red earth bakes under relentless sun that has scorched this landscape for millions of years, the opal mining town of Cappadocia has simply vanished underground. Here, beneath sandstone formations that hold within their layers the fossilized dreams of ancient seas, an entire community lives in excavated homes where the temperature never varies, where the killing heat of the surface world becomes irrelevant, and where the search for precious stones has created a way of life that exists almost entirely in darkness. The opals that draw miners to this remote corner of South Australia formed more than 100 million years ago, when this region lay beneath a vast inland sea that covered much of the continent. As the waters receded and the climate shifted toward the arid conditions that characterize modern Australia, silica-rich solutions seeped through porous sandstone, creating the play of color that makes opals among the most prized of gemstones. The geological processes that created these treasures also left behind sandstone that can be excavated with relative ease, allowing miners to follow opal veins deep into the earth. The decision to live underground in Cappadocia emerges from practical necessity rather than preference. Surface temperatures during summer months regularly exceed 50 degrees Celsius, hot enough to kill exposed humans within hours, and too extreme for conventional air conditioning systems to maintain comfortable indoor conditions. The first opal miners who arrived in this area during the early 20th century quickly discovered that the only sustainable approach to desert living involved burrowing into the earth itself, creating homes that remain naturally cool regardless of surface conditions. The excavation of underground homes follows techniques adapted from mining operations, using machinery designed to remove sandstone efficiently while creating living spaces that meet the basic requirements for human habitation. Miners typically begin by selecting sites where geological surveys indicate stable sandstone formations without significant water infiltration or structural weaknesses that might cause collapse. The digging process requires careful attention to ventilation, drainage, and structural support considerations that transform utilitarian excavation into residential architecture. Each underground home represents a unique solution to the challenge of creating comfortable living space within excavated sandstone. Rooms carved from the bedrock follow the natural contours of the stone formation, creating organic shapes that would be impossible to achieve in conventional construction. Ceiling heights vary depending on the hardness of different sandstone layers, while wall surfaces retain the texture and color variations that reflect millions of years of geological history. The temperature in these underground dwellings remains constant at approximately 23 degrees Celsius year-round, regardless of surface conditions that can vary by more than 40 degrees between summer heat and winter cold. This natural climate control eliminates the need for heating or cooling systems that would be prohibitively expensive to operate in such a remote location, while creating living conditions that many residents describe as more comfortable than conventional homes in more temperate climates. Lighting in underground homes must come entirely from artificial sources. Since no natural illumination can penetrate the sandstone walls, many residents develop lighting schemes that simulate natural day-night cycles, using timer systems and variable intensity bulbs to maintain psychological connections to surface time patterns. Some homes feature elaborate lighting designs that highlight the natural beauty of carved sandstone walls, creating interior decoration that celebrates rather than conceals the underground environment. Ventilation in underground homes requires mechanical systems that bring fresh air from the surface while exhausting stale air through separate channels. The ventilation design must account for the fact that underground spaces naturally tend toward humidity levels that can become uncomfortable or unhealthy without proper air circulation. Most homes feature multiple ventilation points that create cross currents of fresh air throughout the excavated living areas. The social structure of Cuba PD reflects the unique challenges and opportunities of underground living. Neighbors who might be separated by only a few feet of sandstone wall could remain unaware of each other's presence for months, since sound transmission through rock follows unpredictable patterns that create acoustic isolation even in densely populated underground neighborhoods. Community gathering places take on increased importance as venues where residents can maintain social connections that might otherwise atrophy in the isolation of individual underground homes. Water management in the desert environment requires sophisticated systems for capturing, storing, and recycling the limited moisture available in this arid landscape. Underground homes typically feature water storage tanks that collect precious rainfall during the brief periods when precipitation reaches this region, while gray water recycling systems ensure that every drop serves multiple purposes before final disposal. Some homes tap into underground water sources, though the quality and reliability of such sources vary significantly depending on geological conditions. The mining operations that provide economic foundation for Cuba PD continue around the clock, with miners working in shifts that follow patterns determined by optimal digging conditions rather than surface daylight hours. The search for opals requires patience and systematic excavation, since the stones form in irregular patterns that cannot be predicted from surface indicators. Successful miners develop intuitive understanding of geological formations that guides their excavation decisions. Though luck remains a significant factor in determining who discovers valuable stones, storage of mining equipment and opal discoveries requires secure facilities that protect valuable assets from theft while maintaining optimal conditions for preserving equipment and stones. Many miners create elaborate underground storage systems that serve as both practical workshops and display areas for their most prized discoveries. These storage areas often feature climate control systems that maintain stable conditions for sensitive equipment and valuable stones. Yet mysteries persist in the opal fields that continue to puzzle both geologists and experienced miners. Some areas produce exceptional opals, while adjacent sites yield nothing valuable, despite apparently identical geological conditions. Other locations show evidence of ancient mining activities that predate known European settlement, raising questions about whether indigenous populations may have discovered and valued opals long before commercial mining began. The psychological impact of underground living varies dramatically among Cuba PD residents, with some individuals thriving in the constant temperature and protected environment, while others struggle with the absence of natural light and limited views of the outside world. Many residents develop modified daily schedules that include regular surface activities to maintain psychological connections to the natural environment, while others embrace underground living as a preferred lifestyle that offers unique advantages over conventional housing. The acoustic environment in underground homes creates unique conditions where external noise becomes virtually non-existent, while internal sounds may carry in unexpected ways through the sandstone walls. Many residents report that the silence of underground living takes considerable adjustment, particularly for people accustomed to the constant background noise that characterizes urban environments. Some homes feature sound systems that provide artificial background noise to create more familiar acoustic conditions. How extraordinary that human beings should discover in one of Earth's harshest environments a way of life that offers greater comfort than conventional housing in temperate climates. How resourceful these desert dwellers prove to be, transforming the search for precious stones into an entire underground civilization. How quietly profound. This demonstration that sometimes the most extreme challenges require the most radical solutions, that comfort and safety may lie not in conquering difficult environments, but in disappearing completely into their protective embrace, beneath the 7 hills of Rome, where ancient stone carries the weight of an empire that once stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. 40 miles of tunnels wind through volcanic tuff that formed when prehistoric eruptions buried this landscape in ash that would eventually harden into the perfect medium for underground excavation. Here, in passages carved by early Christians who sought to honor their dead according to traditions that conflicted with Roman law, lie the catacomb cities of the departed, where millions of bodies rest in niches cut directly into walls that have absorbed the prayers and tears of mourners for nearly 2,000 years. The volcanic tuff that underlies Rome possesses ideal properties for catacomb construction. Soft enough to carve with simple iron tools, yet stable enough to support the weight of earth and buildings above without requiring elaborate structural reinforcement. This geological foundation, created by eruptions that occurred long before humans arrived in the Italian peninsula, would prove essential to the development of underground burial practices that allowed early Christian communities to maintain their religious traditions while avoiding direct confrontation with imperial authorities who preferred cremation to burial. The excavation of the catacombs began in the 2nd century when Christian communities needed burial spaces that could accommodate their theological requirement for bodily preservation in anticipation of resurrection, a belief that conflicted sharply with Roman cremation practices. The diggers who created these underground necropolies worked systematically, following carefully planned designs that maximize burial capacity while creating processional routes for funeral ceremonies and memorial visits. The burial niches carved into catacomb walls follow standardized dimensions that reflect both practical limitations and religious considerations. Adult graves measure approximately 6 feet in length and just wide enough to accommodate wrapped bodies, while children's niches adjust proportionally to smaller dimensions. The arrangement of burial spaces creates geometric patterns along corridor walls, with multiple levels of niches stacked vertically to make efficient use of available wall space. Each burial niche receives a sealed closure that bears identifying information about the deceased names carved in stone, painted inscriptions, or symbolic decorations that indicate religious faith, social status, or family connections. These closure systems, designed to protect bodies from disturbance while allowing identification by family members and religious authorities, create visual rhythms along catacomb corridors where hundreds or thousands of individual graves contribute to an overall aesthetic of organized memorial. The temperature in the catacombs remains constant throughout the year, hovering around 15 degrees Celsius regardless of surface weather conditions. This natural refrigeration, combined with the low humidity maintained by the porous tuff walls, creates preservation conditions that have kept organic materials intact for centuries. Textiles, wooden objects, and even some soft tissues survive in conditions that would destroy similar materials in surface environments. Ventilation in the underground burial chambers follows natural air circulation patterns created by temperature differentials and carefully positioned openings that connect catacomb passages with surface air sources. The movement of air through these tunnels remains subtle but sufficient to prevent the accumulation of dangerous gases that might develop from decomposing organic materials. Some catacomb systems feature elaborate ventilation designs with multiple air shafts that create circulation patterns throughout extensive tunnel networks. The lighting systems used in catacomb ceremonies relied primarily on oil lamps and candles that created pools of warm illumination in spaces where no natural light could penetrate. The flickering flames of these portable light sources produce dancing shadows on carved walls that enhance the solemnity of funeral rituals, while providing sufficient illumination for the practical activities required for burial and memorial services. Some catacomb chambers feature carved lamp niches positioned to optimize light distribution during ceremonies. Religious artwork in the catacombs demonstrates the early development of Christian iconography in underground spaces where traditional Roman artistic conventions merged with new theological requirements. Wall paintings depict biblical scenes, symbolic representations of faith, and portraits of the deceased that reflect both classical artistic training and emerging Christian aesthetic preferences. These underground art galleries preserve some of the earliest examples of Christian visual culture in settings designed specifically for religious contemplation. The acoustic properties of catacomb chambers create unique conditions for religious ceremonies where spoken prayers and sung hymns take on qualities that participants often describe as otherworldly. The curved ceilings and interconnected passages of some burial chambers produce natural reverberation that amplifies human voices while absorbing harsh echoes that might interfere with ceremonial activities. Many early Christian hymns and prayers may have been composed specifically to take advantage of these acoustic properties. Water infiltration in some catacomb areas creates conditions where mineral deposits accumulate on carved walls and ceiling surfaces, producing natural decorations that enhance the visual impact of underground burial spaces. These mineral formations develop slowly over centuries, creating stalactite and stalagmite formations that add to the cave-like atmosphere of spaces that were originally carved as functional burial facilities but have acquired natural beauty through geological processes. The social organization required for catacomb construction and maintenance demonstrates sophisticated community planning that coordinated the efforts of diggers, stonemasons, artists, and religious authorities over periods that often extended for decades or centuries. Different sections of some catacomb systems show evidence of construction by distinct work crews, suggesting that large underground burial complexes represented community projects that involved multiple generations of workers and planners. Yet mysteries persist in the Roman catacombs that continue to challenge archaeologists and historians studying early Christian communities. Some passages extend far beyond known burial areas, disappearing into unexplored sections that may contain additional chambers or connect with other underground systems. Other catacomb areas show evidence of activities that seem unrelated to burial rooms too large for funeral ceremonies, chambers with features that suggest residential or workshop use. The preservation of organic materials in catacomb environments has revealed unexpected artifacts that provide insights into early Christian daily life and religious practices. Wooden tools, leather items, textile fragments, and even food remains survive in conditions that have kept them intact for centuries, creating accidental archives that document aspects of ancient life that are rarely preserved in surface archaeological sites. Flooding during heavy rains sometimes reveals previously unknown sections of catacomb systems, as groundwater levels rise and fall according to seasonal patterns that bring buried passages temporarily to the surface. These discoveries suggest that the full extent of Roman underground burial systems may be significantly larger than currently known, with entire sections remaining hidden beneath modern city development. The psychological impact of catacomb visits on ancient mourners must have been profound, as families descended from the bright Mediterranean sunlight into underground chambers where their deceased relatives rested in perpetual darkness. The contrast between surface life and underground death would have been emphasized by the sensory transition from warm, bright, noisy street environments to cool, dim, silent burial chambers where time seemed suspended. How remarkable that communities facing religious persecution should choose to honor their dead through underground construction projects that required enormous investments of time, labor, and resources. How patient these catacomb builders must have been, knowing that their excavation work served not immediate practical needs but long-term spiritual requirements. How quietly revolutionary. This creation of underground cities dedicated entirely to death and memory. This demonstration that the most profound human relationships continue even when life itself has ended. Beneath the frozen streets of Montreal, where winter temperatures plunge to depths that make surface travel dangerous for months at a time. 32 kilometers of interconnected tunnels create a parallel city where 500,000 people move daily through climate-controlled passages that connect office buildings, shopping centers, hotels, and metro stations in a network so extensive that residents can live, work, and shop for entire seasons without ever stepping into the brutal Canadian cold. This underground metropolis, known locally as the Underground City or RESO, represents one of the world's most ambitious attempts to create human-friendly environments in climates that challenge the basic requirements for comfortable urban life. The construction of Montreal's underground network began in the 1960s as part of urban development projects that recognized the reality of Canadian winters, that cities built in climates where temperatures regularly drop below -30 degrees Celsius must provide alternatives to surface transportation if they hope to maintain economic activity during the months when exposure to outdoor conditions becomes genuinely life-threatening. The initial tunnels connected major downtown buildings with metro stations, creating protected routes for commuters who would otherwise face hazardous conditions during the daily journeys between home and workplace. The engineering challenges involved in creating Montreal's underground city required innovations in climate control, ventilation, and structural design that pushed the boundaries of 1960s construction technology. Each tunnel segment must maintain comfortable temperatures while managing the enormous temperature differentials that exist between heated underground spaces and the frozen surface world above. The thermal bridge problems created by these temperature differences required insulation systems and vapor barriers that prevent condensation and ice formation from damaging tunnel structures. The excavation process for the underground network followed urban development patterns that coordinated tunnel construction with building projects, allowing developers to integrate underground connections during the initial construction phases rather than attempting to retrofit tunnel access to existing structures. This coordinated approach created underground spaces that feel deliberately planned rather than hastily adapted, with architectural features that make tunnel travel comfortable rather than merely functional. The climate control systems that maintain comfortable conditions in Montreal's underground tunnels represent engineering solutions to problems that most cities never face. The heating requirements alone demand enormous energy inputs to maintain temperatures that allow people to move comfortably through passages that may extend for miles beneath frozen ground. Ventilation systems must provide fresh air while preventing the loss of heated air to surface environments where temperatures can be 60 degrees colder than tunnel conditions. The acoustic environment in Montreal's underground network creates unique soundscapes where the usual urban noises, traffic, construction, weather-related sounds disappear entirely, replaced by the mechanical hum of ventilation systems, the echo of footsteps on hard surfaces, and conversations that carry through tunnel spaces in ways that outdoor speech never could. Many regular users of the underground system develop an appreciation for these quiet spaces that provide respite from the sensory overload that characterizes most urban environments. The lighting systems in the underground tunnels must provide illumination that allows safe navigation while creating pleasant conditions for extended underground travel. Many sections feature lighting designs that simulate natural daylight cycles, using varying color temperatures and intensities to maintain psychological connections to surface time patterns. Shopping areas and public spaces often include decorative lighting that creates welcoming environments despite the absence of windows or natural light sources. The social dynamics of underground urban life in Montreal create community patterns that differ significantly from surface city experiences. People who might never interact in conventional urban settings find themselves sharing enclosed spaces for extended periods, creating informal social networks that develop around the shared experience of underground commuting. The tunnel system becomes a social space where regular users recognize each other and develop casual relationships based on shared underground routes. Commercial development within the underground network has created a complete retail ecosystem where shops, restaurants, and service businesses cater specifically to underground foot traffic. These businesses operate according to patterns that reflect underground demographics rather than surface commercial rhythms, often staying open later to serve commuters who use tunnel routes for evening activities as well as daytime travel. The economic activity generated by underground commerce has become a significant component of Montreal's urban economy. Wayfinding in the extensive tunnel network requires signage systems that help navigators orient themselves in spaces where traditional landmarks, street names, building facades, natural features are absent or irrelevant. The underground city uses color-coded route markers, numbered junction points, and detailed maps that allow users to plan underground journeys that might involve multiple connections through different sections of the network. The maintenance requirements for Montreal's underground system demand year-round attention to mechanical systems that must operate continuously to maintain habitable conditions. Heating system failures during winter months could create life-threatening conditions for people trapped in tunnels, while ventilation problems might make underground spaces unusable. The technical infrastructure that supports underground urban life requires backup systems and emergency protocols that most cities never need to consider. Emergency preparedness in the underground network involves procedures for evacuating large numbers of people from enclosed spaces where conventional emergency exits may be limited. Fire safety systems must account for the unique challenges of underground fires, where smoke evacuation and emergency access require different approaches than surface emergencies. Security systems monitor tunnel areas that might otherwise provide concealment for criminal activity in spaces where natural surveillance is impossible. Yet mysteries persist in Montreal's underground network that even regular users rarely discover. Some sections of the tunnel system connect to spaces that are not included in official maps' service areas, abandoned construction zones, or connections to building basements that were included during construction but never developed for public use. Other areas show evidence of modifications or expansions that occurred without public documentation, creating unofficial spaces within the official underground city. The psychological impact of spending significant portions of daily life in underground environments varies dramatically among Montreal residents, with some people thriving in the protected, climate-controlled tunnel environment, while others experience claustrophobia or disorientation from extended periods without natural light or surface views. Many regular tunnel users develop strategies for maintaining psychological well-being during long underground commutes, including deliberate surface breaks and scheduled outdoor activities. The relationship between Montreal's underground city and the surface urban environment creates interesting patterns where some areas of downtown Montreal see dramatically reduced pedestrian traffic during winter months, as residents migrate to underground routes for daily activities. Street-level businesses must adapt to seasonal patterns where their customer base disappears underground for months at a time, while underground businesses experience peak seasons that correspond to surface weather extremes. How remarkable that urban planners should create an entire parallel city to solve the problem of winter climate that makes conventional urban life challenging for months at a time. How sophisticated these underground urban systems prove to be, providing not just transportation alternatives, but complete environments where urban life can continue regardless of surface conditions. How quietly revolutionary. This demonstration that cities need not be prisoners of their climate, that human ingenuity can create comfortable environments even where nature provides conditions that challenge basic survival. In the suburban neighborhoods of America during the Cold War decades, when the threat of nuclear annihilation shaped domestic architecture as profoundly as any aesthetic movement, millions of families descended into their basements to construct fallout shelters, underground sanctuaries designed not for comfort or convenience, but for survival in a world that might be transformed into radioactive wasteland within the span of a single afternoon. These domestic bunkers, built beneath ranch houses and split-level homes from coast to coast, represent one of history's most widespread experiments in underground living, where ordinary citizens prepared to spend weeks or months in spaces barely larger than closets while civilization rebuilt itself above their heads. The construction of family fallout shelters followed government guidelines distributed through civil defense programs that provided detailed instructions for converting basement areas into radiation-proof environments capable of sustaining human life during the weeks following a nuclear attack. The recommended designs emphasized thick concrete walls, adequate ventilation systems, and storage capacity for food, water, and medical supplies that would allow families to remain underground until surface radiation levels dropped to survivable ranges. The excavation process for basement shelters typically involved removing existing basement flooring and digging additional depth to create headroom for adults who might need to spend extended periods in underground quarters. The removed earth often went into backyard gardens or landscaping projects, creating invisible evidence of family preparation for nuclear war while maintaining the suburban facade that characterized post-war American neighborhoods. The structural requirements for effective fallout protection demanded construction techniques that most homeowners had never attempted, involving the pouring of reinforced concrete walls thick enough to block gamma radiation while supporting the weight of debris that might accumulate above ground level during nuclear attacks. Many families hired contractors experienced in basement construction, though government materials encouraged do-it-yourself approaches that would allow families to build shelter systems using readily available materials and basic construction tools. The ventilation systems required for fallout shelters presented engineering challenges that pushed the limits of residential construction knowledge, since the shelters needed to provide fresh air while filtering out radioactive particles that might contaminate outside air supplies. Many shelter designs featured hand-cranked ventilation systems that could operate without electricity, along with filtration components that removed radioactive dust from incoming air while maintaining adequate air circulation for human survival. Food storage in fallout shelters followed government recommendations for non-perishable supplies that could sustain families for periods ranging from 2 weeks to several months, depending on the anticipated severity of nuclear contamination in different geographical areas. The storage systems needed to preserve food quality in underground environments where temperature and humidity control might be limited, while maximizing nutrition density in spaces where storage capacity was severely restricted. Water storage and purification systems in family shelters required solutions for providing clean drinking water when surface water supplies might be contaminated by radioactive fallout. Many shelters included large water tanks filled with treated water, while others featured purification systems that could process contaminated water sources if underground storage became insufficient during extended shelter periods. The psychological preparation for fallout shelter living involved family discussions and practice sessions designed to help adults and children adapt to the prospect of spending weeks in confined underground spaces where privacy would be minimal and entertainment options severely limited. Many families stocked their shelters with books, games, and educational materials that could occupy time and maintain morale during periods when surface conditions made leaving the shelter impossible. The lighting systems in fallout shelters relied primarily on battery-powered devices and hand-cranked generators that could provide illumination without dependence on electrical systems that might be destroyed during nuclear attacks. Some shelters featured elaborate lighting arrangements that could simulate day-night cycles to help maintain normal sleep patterns during extended underground residence, while others focused on minimal lighting that conserved battery power for essential activities. Sanitation facilities in family fallout shelters presented some of the most challenging aspects of designing domestic spaces for extended underground occupation. Most shelter designs included chemical toilets or makeshift waste disposal systems that could function without connection to municipal sewer systems that might be damaged or contaminated during nuclear emergencies. The management of human waste in confined spaces became a practical concern that many families preferred not to discuss in detail. The temperature control in underground shelters relied primarily on the Earth's natural insulation properties to maintain moderate temperatures without elaborate heating or cooling systems that might not function during post-attack conditions. Many shelters remained uncomfortably cool during winter months and stuffy during summer periods, creating living conditions that challenged family comfort while providing essential protection from radiation exposure. Communication systems in fallout shelters often included battery-powered radios that could receive emergency broadcasts from government stations, providing information about surface conditions and instructions for post-attack recovery procedures. Some elaborate shelter installations featured radio equipment that could communicate with other shelter families or emergency coordination centers, creating underground communication networks that could operate independently of damaged surface infrastructure. The medical supplies stored in family fallout shelters followed government recommendations for treating radiation sickness, injuries that might result from nuclear attacks, and routine health problems that could become serious without access to conventional medical care. Many families included prescription medications, first aid supplies, and medical reference materials that would allow them to provide basic health care during periods when hospitals and medical facilities might be unavailable. Yet mysteries persist about the psychological and social impact of widespread fallout shelter construction on American suburban communities during the Cold War decades. The effect on family relationships of planning for extended confinement in spaces where privacy and personal space would be severely limited remains a subject that few families discussed openly, leaving historians to speculate about how domestic life might have changed during actual shelter occupancy. The actual use of family fallout shelters during Cold War crises, such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, appears to have been limited, with most families choosing to remain in their surface homes rather than occupying shelters during periods when nuclear war seemed possible. The gap between preparation and actual behavior during crisis periods suggests that the psychological barriers to underground living were higher than government planners anticipated. The conversion of fallout shelters to other uses after the Cold War ended demonstrates the adaptability of underground domestic spaces to purposes their builders never intended. Many former shelters became storage areas, workshop spaces, or recreational rooms where families could enjoy privacy and quiet activities. Some elaborate shelter installations retained their emergency preparedness features while serving as specialized hobby rooms or exercise areas. How extraordinary that millions of American families should invest time, money, and emotional energy in preparing underground spaces for a catastrophe that they simultaneously hoped would never occur. How sobering to consider the domestic conversations that must have taken place as parents explained to children why the family needed to practice spending time in basement shelters. How quietly profound. This transformation of suburban homes into potential survival shelters. This demonstration that even the most comfortable domestic environments could be adapted for the most extreme circumstances human civilization had ever contemplated. Beneath the sprawling capital of the People's Republic of China, where ancient hutongs intersect with modern boulevards and millions of residents navigate daily life in one of the world's most densely populated urban centers, lies a second Beijing that few outsiders have ever seen, an underground city carved from the bedrock during the 1960s and 1970s by workers who labored in shifts around the clock to create a subterranean metropolis complete with hospitals, schools, factories, and residential quarters designed to shelter the entire population of the surface city during nuclear warfare that planners believed would inevitably come. The construction of Beijing's underground city began during the height of Sino-Soviet tensions, when Chinese leadership determined that the capital's strategic importance made it a likely target for nuclear attack, and that conventional air raid shelters would prove inadequate for protecting millions of residents during extended periods of radioactive contamination. The project required excavation techniques that pushed the boundaries of 1960s construction technology, involving the removal of millions of tons of earth and rock to create spaces large enough to accommodate entire neighborhoods in underground chambers. The geological conditions beneath Beijing presented both opportunities and challenges for large-scale underground construction. The relatively stable soil composition allowed extensive excavation without the elaborate structural support systems that would be required in less stable ground, while seasonal variations in groundwater levels created flooding problems that required sophisticated drainage and waterproofing systems to maintain habitable conditions in the deepest chambers. The workforce assigned to underground city construction included millions of Beijing residents who contributed labor during evening hours and weekends while maintaining their regular employment during normal working hours. This massive volunteer effort represented one of the largest coordinated construction projects in human history, involving participants ranging from office workers and teachers to farmers and factory employees who learned excavation and construction techniques through practical experience rather than formal training. The design of the underground city followed urban planning principles that attempted to recreate the essential features of surface Beijing in subterranean environments where natural light and outdoor spaces would be impossible. Planners allocated underground areas for residential neighborhoods, commercial districts, educational facilities, and industrial zones that could maintain economic and social activity during periods when surface occupation became impossible due to nuclear contamination. The ventilation systems required for the underground city demanded engineering solutions that could provide fresh air for millions of people in enclosed spaces where natural air circulation would be minimal. The designers created elaborate networks of air shafts and mechanical ventilation systems that could filter radioactive particles while maintaining adequate oxygen levels throughout the extensive tunnel and chamber networks. Transportation within the underground city required the construction of underground roadways and pedestrian passages that could accommodate the movement of people and supplies throughout the subterranean complex. Some areas featured underground vehicle routes wide enough for trucks and emergency vehicles, while other sections included moving walkways and elevator systems that could transport people efficiently between different levels of the underground city. The power generation and distribution systems for the underground city needed to operate independently of surface electrical infrastructure that might be destroyed during nuclear attacks. Underground power plants featured generators that could run on stored fuel supplies, while electrical distribution networks followed routes that remained protected from surface damage while providing adequate power for lighting, ventilation, and essential equipment throughout the underground complex. Water supply and waste management systems in the underground city required infrastructure that could serve millions of residents without connection to surface utilities that might become contaminated or non-functional during emergency conditions. Underground water treatment facilities processed both fresh water supplies and wastewater using systems that could operate for extended periods without external support or maintenance. Food production and storage facilities in the underground city included areas designated for growing crops using artificial lighting systems, along with storage areas that could preserve large quantities of non-perishable foods during extended periods of surface isolation. Some underground areas featured complete food processing facilities that could maintain nutrition supplies for the entire underground population using resources that could be stockpiled in advance of emergency conditions. The residential areas of the underground city provided basic accommodation for families who might need to remain underground for months or years while surface conditions recovered from nuclear contamination. The living spaces followed minimal standards that prioritized essential needs over comfort, with sleeping areas, basic sanitation facilities, and shared common spaces that could maintain community life during extended underground residence. Educational facilities in the underground city included schools that could continue providing instruction for children during periods when surface schools might be destroyed or contaminated. These underground classrooms featured educational materials and equipment that could maintain learning programs without access to conventional educational resources, ensuring that extended underground residence would not interrupt the education of young people. Medical facilities in the underground city included hospitals and clinics equipped to provide healthcare services during periods when surface medical facilities might be unavailable. These underground medical centers featured surgical equipment, pharmaceutical supplies, and medical personnel quarters that could maintain healthcare services for the entire underground population during extended emergency periods. Industrial facilities in the underground city included manufacturing areas that could produce essential goods and equipment during periods when surface production might be interrupted by nuclear damage or contamination. These underground factories featured machinery and raw materials that could maintain production of basic necessities without dependence on surface supply chains or transportation networks. Yet mysteries persist about the actual extent and current condition of Beijing's underground city. Since much of the complex remains classified and inaccessible to outside observers, official information about the underground facilities provides only general descriptions, leaving questions about the total size, current maintenance status, and operational capacity of systems that were designed decades ago using technology that has since become obsolete. The psychological and social implications of planning for the potential underground residents of an entire major city raise questions that were never fully addressed during the construction period. The prospect of millions of people adapting to underground living during extended periods of surface isolation would have required social adaptations and psychological preparations that went far beyond the technical challenges of construction and engineering. The current use of Beijing's underground city facilities appears to vary significantly in different areas, with some sections serving as storage spaces, others adapted for commercial or residential purposes, and still others remaining sealed or abandoned. The conversion of spaces originally designed for emergency shelter to peacetime uses demonstrates the adaptability of underground infrastructure to purposes that were never included in the original planning. How remarkable that a single city should undertake construction of underground facilities capable of sheltering its entire population during nuclear warfare. How extraordinary the scale of human cooperation required to excavate and construct subterranean infrastructure for millions of residents using primarily manual labor and basic construction equipment. How quietly ambitious. This attempt to create a complete underground civilization that could maintain urban life even if the surface world became uninhabitable for extended periods. In the limestone quarries abandoned across Europe and North America, where medieval stonemasons once extracted blocks for cathedrals and castles, a different kind of harvest now flourishes in chambers that have known only artificial light for centuries. Here, in underground spaces where temperatures remain constant year-round and humidity can be controlled with precision impossible in surface agriculture, mushroom farmers cultivate crops that transform darkness into sustenance, creating food production systems that operate according to principles entirely different from the photosynthesis that drives conventional farming. The limestone caverns that provide ideal conditions for mushroom cultivation were created by quarrying operations that followed geological formations laid down when ancient seas covered much of Europe and eastern North America. The excavation techniques used by medieval quarrymen created chambers with architectural qualities that medieval builders needed for construction projects, while inadvertently producing underground environments that would prove perfect for agricultural purposes that the original diggers never imagined. The conversion of abandoned quarries to mushroom farms required understanding of the unique environmental conditions that fungi need for optimal growth conditions that happen to match precisely the characteristics of limestone caves. The constant temperature, controlled humidity, and complete absence of natural light that make quarries unsuitable for conventional agriculture create perfect growing conditions for mushrooms that evolved in forest environments where sunlight rarely penetrates to ground level. The preparation of limestone caves for mushroom production involves careful attention to air circulation systems that can maintain optimal growing conditions while preventing the accumulation of carbon dioxide and other gases that mushrooms produce during their growth cycles. The natural ventilation that occurs in many limestone formations provides the foundation for controlled air movement that mushroom cultivation requires. Though most commercial operations supplement natural airflow with mechanical ventilation systems, the growing medium used for mushroom cultivation in limestone caves typically consists of composted organic materials that provide the nutrients that fungi need while creating the proper texture and moisture retention characteristics for optimal mushroom development. The preparation of this growing medium requires expertise in composting techniques that create nutrient-rich substrates while avoiding contamination problems that could destroy entire crops. The cultivation process begins with the introduction of mushroom spawn, specially prepared fungal material that will develop into the mushroom crops into the prepared growing medium. The spawn must be distributed carefully throughout the growing beds to ensure even mushroom development while avoiding overcrowding that could reduce crop yields. The timing of spawn introduction requires precise attention to temperature and humidity conditions that must be maintained throughout the growing cycle. The harvesting of mushrooms in underground farms requires skilled workers who can identify optimal picking times while maintaining the cleanliness standards that food production demands. Mushroom harvesting typically occurs in multiple waves as different mushrooms reach maturity at different times, requiring daily attention to growing beds and careful selection of mushrooms that are ready for market while leaving others to continue developing. The storage and processing of harvested mushrooms takes advantage of the same cool, humid conditions that promote mushroom growth, allowing underground farms to maintain product quality from harvest through packaging without the temperature fluctuations that can damage mushrooms during surface storage. Many underground mushroom operations include processing facilities that clean, package, and prepare mushrooms for market distribution without ever exposing the products to surface environmental conditions. The economic advantages of underground mushroom cultivation include year-round production schedules that are unaffected by seasonal weather variations, protection from agricultural pests that cannot survive in underground environments, and optimal growing conditions that can produce higher yields per square foot than surface farming methods. These advantages have made underground mushroom farming economically competitive with surface agriculture despite the initial costs of converting quarries to agricultural use. The environmental impact of underground mushroom farming demonstrates sustainable agriculture principles that minimize resource consumption while maximizing food production. The controlled environment of limestone caves requires less water than surface farming, produces no agricultural runoff that could contaminate water supplies, and utilizes spaces that would otherwise remain unused while preserving surface land for other agricultural or environmental purposes. The workforce required for underground mushroom farming includes specialists in fungal cultivation techniques, environmental control systems, and food safety protocols that ensure product quality while maintaining efficient production schedules. Many underground farms employ workers year-round rather than seasonally, providing stable employment that is unaffected by weather conditions or seasonal agricultural cycles that characterize surface farming operations. The research and development activities conducted in underground mushroom farms have led to innovations in fungal cultivation that benefit both commercial agriculture and scientific understanding of mushroom biology. The controlled conditions possible in underground environments allow researchers to experiment with growing techniques, study mushroom development, and develop new varieties that might not be possible to study in less controlled surface environments. The social and cultural aspects of underground mushroom farming create unique agricultural communities where workers develop specialized knowledge about fungal cultivation while maintaining connection to food production systems that operate according to principles entirely different from conventional farming. Many underground farms become centers of expertise in mycology and sustainable agriculture that contribute knowledge to broader agricultural research and development. Yet, mysteries persist in the underground mushroom farming industry about the full potential of fungal cultivation in controlled environments. Some limestone caves contain natural fungal populations that might provide sources for new mushroom varieties, while others show evidence of historical mushroom cultivation that predates modern commercial operations, suggesting that underground fungal farming may have been practiced for longer periods than currently documented. The expansion of underground mushroom farming to abandoned mines, subway tunnels, and other underground spaces demonstrates the adaptability of fungal cultivation techniques to various underground environments. Urban underground farms have begun utilizing basements, abandoned subway stations, and other underground spaces in cities where surface agricultural land is unavailable or prohibitively expensive. The nutritional and culinary qualities of mushrooms grown in underground environments often exceed those of surface-grown mushrooms, with controlled growing conditions producing mushrooms with enhanced flavor, texture, and nutritional content that appeal to both commercial markets and gourmet culinary applications. The consistent quality possible in underground growing conditions allows mushroom farmers to develop premium products that command higher prices than conventionally grown mushrooms. The technological innovations developed for underground mushroom farming include environmental control systems, automated harvesting equipment, and monitoring technologies that could be applied to other forms of controlled environment agriculture. These technologies demonstrate principles that could be used for underground cultivation of other crops, potentially expanding the range of foods that could be produced in underground agricultural systems. How remarkable that abandoned quarries should find new purpose as agricultural facilities producing food crops in environments where conventional agriculture would be impossible. How ingenious these mushroom farmers prove to be, transforming industrial waste spaces into productive agricultural systems that operate according to biological principles entirely different from photosynthetic agriculture. How quietly revolutionary. This demonstration that food production need not depend on sunlight and soil, that darkness itself can be transformed into agricultural abundance through understanding of natural systems that thrive in conditions where conventional crops cannot survive. In the deepest reaches of modern civilization, where fiber optic cables carry the dreams and memories of billions of people through passages carved from bedrock, A new generation of cave dwellers tends the digital hearth of human knowledge in climate-controlled caverns that maintain more precise environmental conditions than any medieval monastery or ancient temple ever achieved. These data centers, buried beneath mountains and housed in repurposed missile silos, represent humanity's latest experiment in underground living spaces where the custodians of digital memory work in perpetual twilight, maintaining the servers and cooling systems that preserve every photograph, every email, every search query that defines contemporary human experience. The construction of underground data centers follows engineering principles that prioritize security, environmental control, and protection from both natural disasters and human interference over the comfort considerations that drive residential underground architecture. These facilities burrow into bedrock formations that provide natural protection from electromagnetic interference, seismic activity, and temperature fluctuations while offering the physical security that storing valuable digital information requires in an interconnected world where data represents economic value that often exceeds the worth of physical goods. The excavation process for modern underground data centers utilizes techniques borrowed from both mining operations and military construction, creating spaces that must meet the structural requirements for supporting massive server installations while maintaining the environmental precision that digital equipment demands. The removed earth and rock often goes towards surface landscaping that conceals the underground facilities, creating parks and recreational areas that disguise some of the world's most sophisticated technological installations. The cooling systems required for underground data centers represent some of the most advanced climate control technology ever developed. Since the servers that store digital information generate enormous amounts of heat while requiring operating temperatures that remain stable within fractions of a degree, the cooling systems must remove this heat while maintaining humidity levels that prevent both condensation that could damage electronic equipment and static electricity that could corrupt stored data. The power requirements for underground data centers demand electrical systems that can operate continuously without interruption, since any loss of power could result in the destruction of digital information that might be impossible to replace. These facilities typically feature multiple backup power systems, including diesel generators, battery storage systems, and connections to multiple electrical grids that provide redundant power sources for maintaining operations during emergencies. The security systems protecting underground data centers include both physical barriers that prevent unauthorized access and digital security measures that protect stored information from electronic intrusion. The underground location provides natural security advantages by limiting access points and concealing facilities from visual surveillance. While sophisticated monitoring systems track every person and piece of equipment that enters these digital sanctuaries, the environmental control systems in underground data centers maintain atmospheric conditions that protect both human workers and sensitive electronic equipment, filtering air to remove particles that could damage server components while maintaining oxygen levels that support human life in spaces where natural ventilation is impossible. These systems often include positive pressure systems that prevent outside air from entering sensitive areas where contamination could destroy valuable equipment. The network infrastructure that connects underground data centers to surface communications systems requires fiber optic cables and communications equipment that can maintain high-speed data transmission despite the physical barriers that underground installation creates. These communication systems must provide redundant pathways that ensure continuous connectivity even if individual cables or communication nodes experience failures. The workspace design in underground data centers creates environments where human technicians can maintain and monitor equipment that operates continuously without interruption. These work areas feature specialized lighting that allows detailed technical work while minimizing heat production, along with ergonomic workstations that allow technicians to perform complex maintenance procedures in spaces where mobility may be limited by equipment density. The staffing requirements for underground data centers include specialists in computer hardware, networking systems, and environmental control who must work in isolation from surface populations while maintaining the technical systems that support digital civilization. Many underground data center workers develop strong preferences for the controlled environment and quiet atmosphere that underground technical work provides, finding that the absence of surface distractions enhances their ability to focus on complex technical problems. The storage capacity of modern underground data centers has reached scales that challenge human comprehension, with individual facilities capable of storing petabytes of digital information, enough data to represent every book ever written, every photograph ever taken, every piece of music ever recorded, multiplied by factors that render such comparisons meaningless. The physical infrastructure required to store such quantities of information creates underground landscapes that resemble technological cathedrals more than conventional computer facilities. The redundancy systems built into underground data centers ensure that digital information remains accessible even if individual storage devices fail. Communication systems are interrupted, or entire sections of facilities become unavailable due to technical problems or natural disasters. These backup systems often involve replicating stored data across multiple underground facilities located in different geographical areas, creating distributed storage networks that preserve information even during regional catastrophes. Yet, mysteries persist about the full extent and capabilities of underground data centers that operate with security classifications that prevent public understanding of their true scope and purpose. Some facilities reportedly store classified government information, while others maintain backup copies of critical digital infrastructure that could be used to restore communication systems during national emergencies. The psychological impact of working in underground data centers varies significantly among technical personnel, with some workers thriving in the controlled, quiet environment, while others experience isolation and claustrophobia from spending extended periods in spaces without natural light or surface contact. Many facilities have developed work rotation schedules that limit the amount of time individual workers spend underground while ensuring continuous staffing for critical operations. The energy consumption of large underground data centers represents a significant portion of total electrical usage in some regions, with cooling systems alone consuming amounts of electricity that could power entire cities. The environmental impact of maintaining these digital repositories has led to innovations in renewable energy systems and energy-efficient cooling technologies that reduce the ecological footprint of digital storage while maintaining the reliability that digital civilization requires. The future expansion of underground data center technology may include facilities designed to preserve digital information for geological timescales, creating digital archives that could survive natural disasters, climate change, and even civilizational collapse while maintaining the technical capability to restore human knowledge for future generations who might need to rebuild digital infrastructure from underground foundations. The social implications of storing human civilization's digital memory in underground facilities raise questions about who controls access to this information and how democratic societies can maintain transparency while protecting the security of digital infrastructure that has become essential for economic, social, and political functioning in contemporary societies. How extraordinary that human beings should choose to preserve their most valuable digital possessions in underground sanctuaries that operate according to environmental standards more precise than those required for human life itself. How quietly profound. This creation of digital monasteries where technological monks tend electronic memories in chambers that may outlast the surface civilizations that created them. How remarkable that the most advanced technology of the digital age should require the most ancient human strategy for preservation burial in the protective embrace of the earth itself. Across the millennia and continents, through empires that rose and fell while their foundations remained hidden beneath the earth, the pattern repeats with the quiet persistence of geological process itself. Human beings, when faced with the extremes that surface existence demands persecution and warfare, climate that kills, social collapse that renders the familiar world unrecognizable, descend into darkness, not as defeat, but as adaptation. Not as burial, but as rebirth into forms of life that the surface world cannot provide. In limestone quarries and volcanic tuff, in clay soil and bedrock, in salt deposits and ancient stone, they carve sanctuaries that outlast the civilizations that created them. The underground cities of Cappadocia still shelter visitors more than 1,000 years after their Christian builders carved the first chambers from soft volcanic rock. Their ventilation systems still circulating air through passages where torch flames once danced against stone walls carved by hands that knew they were building for generations not yet born. The engineering principles that guided those early excavations, the understanding that Earth provides what surface architecture cannot, the recognition that safety sometimes lies in disappearance rather than fortification, continue to influence underground construction projects that span the globe. In Paris, the limestone quarries that once provided building stones for medieval cathedrals now house the remains of 6 million souls, creating an necropolis where human bones form architectural elements that transform death into art, mortality into monument. The temperature in these chambers remains constant as the bones themselves, neither warm with life nor cold with decay, but something neutral that speaks to the geological patience of stone and the temporal democracy of death that claims both quarrymen and kings. The salt mines of Poland preserve underground chapels where mineral tears weep from crystalline walls, where miners carved religious art from the very substance they labored to extract, transforming commercial excavation into sacred space with tools that bit into sodium chloride deposits laid down when prehistoric seas covered landscapes that would not see sunlight for millions of years. The acoustic properties of these salt chambers still amplify prayers and hymns with clarity that rivals the greatest cathedral acoustics, demonstrating that the most profound expressions of human spirituality can emerge from the most utilitarian environments. In the tunnels beneath Vietnam, where entire communities vanished into clay earth that hardened around them like protective armor, families maintained schools and hospitals in passages so narrow that most visitors must crawl, proving that human society can adapt to conditions that challenge every assumption about space requirements for civilized life. The ingenuity that created smoke dispersal systems allowing cooking fires to burn undetected while enemy forces patrolled overhead represents innovation born from necessity that transforms the earth itself into both shelter and weapon. The London Underground stations that housed 80,000 refugees during the Blitz continue to carry commuters through tunnels that once echoed with children's voices and impromptu concerts, their platforms bearing invisible traces of the communities that formed spontaneously when surface life became untenable. The acoustic memories of those wartime nights, the singing that took advantage of tunnel acoustics to create performances that could be heard throughout entire stations, remind contemporary travelers that transportation infrastructure can become social infrastructure when circumstances demand adaptation. In the Australian desert, where surface temperatures make conventional housing impossible for months at a time, the underground town of Kuba Pedy demonstrates that some of humanity's harshest environments become manageable through the simple strategy of disappearing into the earth, creating homes in excavated sandstone where temperature remains comfortable regardless of conditions that could kill exposed humans within hours. The opal miners who created this underground community discovered that the search for beautiful stones could become a way of life that offers greater comfort than conventional housing in temperate climates. The Roman catacombs preserve 40 miles of burial chambers where early Christians honored their dead in chambers carved from volcanic tuff, creating cities of the departed that demonstrate how religious conviction can motivate construction projects that span generations and challenge imperial authority through the quiet rebellion of alternative burial practices. The preservation of organic materials in these chambers continues to yield artifacts that provide insights into daily life during periods when surface records were lost or destroyed. Montreal's underground city shelters 500,000 daily commuters from Canadian winters that make surface travel dangerous, creating a parallel urban environment where complete urban lives can unfold without exposure to climatic extremes that challenge basic human survival. The engineering systems that maintain comfortable conditions in 32 kilometers of tunnels demonstrate solutions to urban planning problems that most cities never face, proving that human communities can thrive in artificial environments when natural conditions make surface life challenging. The Cold War fallout. Shelters that millions of American families constructed in suburban basements represent the most widespread experiment in domestic underground architecture in human history. Though most were never occupied during actual emergencies, these domestic bunkers demonstrate how global political tensions can influence residential architecture, transforming basement construction into preparation for civilizational collapse while maintaining suburban facades that concealed underground preparations for nuclear warfare. Beijing's underground city, carved by millions of workers during the height of Cold War tensions, represents perhaps the most ambitious underground construction project ever attempted. Subterranean infrastructure designed to shelter an entire major city during nuclear warfare, complete with hospitals, schools, and factories that could maintain urban civilization even if the surface world became uninhabitable for extended periods. The mushroom farms that flourish in abandoned limestone quarries across Europe and North America demonstrate that agricultural systems can operate in environments where conventional photosynthetic farming is impossible, transforming industrial waste spaces into food production facilities that operate year-round regardless of surface weather conditions. These underground agricultural systems prove that darkness itself can be transformed into sustenance through understanding of biological systems that evolved to thrive without sunlight. In the deepest reaches of contemporary underground architecture, data centers house humanity's digital memories in climate-controlled chambers that maintain environmental conditions more precise than those required for human life, creating technological monasteries where digital monks tend electronic archives that may preserve human knowledge longer than the surface civilizations that created them. The patterns that connect these underground spaces across time and geography reveal something fundamental about human adaptability: the recognition that the Earth itself offers resources that surface environments cannot provide, a constant temperature that requires no fuel to maintain, protection from weather that needs no repair or replacement, acoustic properties that enhance rather than diminish human community, security that comes not from walls designed to keep threats out, but from invisibility that makes detection impossible. Perhaps most remarkably, the people who choose underground life consistently report not claustrophobia or isolation, but a different kind of peace, the stillness that comes from living in spaces where external pressures become irrelevant, where the urgent rhythms of surface existence give way to patterns determined by human need rather than environmental emergency. In chambers where no bird has ever sung, communities create their own music. In passages where no natural light can penetrate, families develop intimacy with darkness that becomes not the absence of sight, but the presence of different ways of seeing. The Earth keeps its own time here, measured not in solar days or seasonal cycles, but in the slow settling of stone. the patient accumulation of mineral deposits, the gradual adaptation of human communities to environments that operate according to geological rather than meteorological patterns. Underground. Human time takes precedence. Meals eaten when hunger calls. Sleep when exhaustion demands. Work following patterns established by community needs rather than celestial mechanics. How quietly revolutionary. This consistent human choice to seek safety not in conquering difficult environments, but in disappearing into their protective embrace. How patient these underground builders prove to be, knowing that the spaces they create serve not immediate convenience but long-term survival. Not individual comfort, but community resilience. How profound. This demonstration that the most advanced human civilizations consistently rediscover the most ancient human strategy, that when the surface world becomes too dangerous, too hot, too cold, too visible, the earth itself offers sanctuary for those wise enough to seek it in the darkness that has sheltered life since the first organic molecules learned to hide from radiation in the shadows of primordial stone. And so the people return to darkness, as they always have, as they always will, in chambers carved from stone that remembers seas that dried before continents took their current shape, in tunnels that follow the quiet mathematics of underground water, in spaces where temperature follows the Earth's own rhythm rather than the urgent demands of surface weather. Human communities find what they have always sought in the depths, not escape from the world above, but refuge within the world itself. The sounds that fill these spaces grow softer now. Footsteps becoming whispers on worn stone floors. Conversations settling into the acoustic embrace of carved walls that have absorbed 1,000 years of human voices. Children's laughter echoes through passages where it mingles with the ancient silence, creating new forms of music that exist only in places where no natural sound has ever disturbed the fundamental quiet of compressed earth. The lights begin to dim in these underground sanctuaries. Oil lamps flickering toward extinction. Electric bulbs reducing to gentle glows that barely distinguish wall from shadow, creating twilight conditions that ease the transition between waking and sleeping, between consciousness and the deeper rest that comes to those who trust their safety to stone pillars and earthen walls that will not shift with wind or season. Temperature settles toward the neutral warmth that the earth maintains regardless of surface storms. A geological embrace that asks nothing from human heating systems, that provides comfort without fuel, without maintenance, without the endless vigilance that surface climate control demands. Bodies adapt to this constant coolness, finding in it not the absence of warmth, but the presence of something more reliable than any fire that requires tending. The air grows still in these depths, moving only in the gentle currents that ventilation systems create to sustain life, carrying with it the mineral taste of limestone, the crystalline breath of salt chambers, the clay-touched moisture that speaks of earth that has known water for millions of years before humans learned to shape it into shelter. Darkness gathers in the spaces between artificial lights, not as enemy, but as companion, as the natural condition that allows rest to come completely, that provides the deep sleep possible only in places where no dawn will interrupt dreams, where morning exists only as human decision rather than solar command. The people who have chosen earth over sky, depth over height, invisibility over exposure, settle into this darkness like homecoming, and in this settling, in this return to the quiet that underlies all sound, to the coolness that requires no fire, to the darkness that needs no light, the underground dwellers join the patient breathing of stone itself, the slow exhalation of earth that has sheltered life since organic molecules first sought protection from radiation in the shadows of primordial rock. They become part of the geological rhythm that measures time not in heartbeats or seasons, but in the gradual settling of continents, the patient accumulation of sediment, the million-year cycles that transform seafloors into mountain ranges and return them again to the silent depths from which all shelter ultimately comes. The earth embraces them as it has embraced all who seek its protection, holding them in chambers that will outlast the surface storms, the political upheavals, the climate changes that make the world above seem temporary, while the world below remains, always, a constant invitation to those who understand that the deepest safety lies not in conquering the landscape, but in becoming part of it, in disappearing so completely into stone and clay and crystalline salt that surface troubles cannot find them, cannot disturb the profound rest that comes to those who trust their lives to the ancient darkness that has been waiting, patient as stone itself, for their return.